All right, we're back with episode 4. Ben, what are we talking about this time?
I'm very excited. We're not talking about a beverage that's thousands of years old this time. We're talking about a very fancy beverage. We're talking about champagne.
We are. And this is probably going to be one of my favorites. I really like champagne. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I have a little bottle of Moet. I'm going to try to open it and see if we can open it near the microphone, see if we can get a little pop. Did you see the little bit of
I saw a little
mist? We're going to talk about why that happens, because there's a scientific reason why you get a little bit of mist when you open a bottle of champagne. So it's not thousands of years old. How old do we think champagne is?
I'm very excited to say that we did beer, we did cider, we did wine, all of them thousands of years old. Champagne's only a few hundred years.
Only. Oh, new kid on the block.
No big deal. 17th century is where 17th century France is where champagne began, due to the unique climate and soil conditions, which proved ideal for growing specific grapes that lent themselves to what we now call champagne.
And some monks that were patient enough to pitch a bunch of sugar back into the wine and get the bubbles.
Yes, it was the secondary fermentation process. There's a fermentation process for wine. But then, as the legend goes, a Benedictine monk by the name of
Dom Perignon
implemented a secondary fermentation process on the wines.
I think from what I've read, so I first became just completely fascinated with champagne. I've always liked it, but fascinated with it when Demos gave me the biography of the Veuve Clicquot. So Veuve is the French word for widow. So the widow Clicquot, she was widowed and then took over the champagne house that her husband had started and made it what it is today, which is a huge, huge business, right? And she was very daring. Champagne at the time was very sweet. And there is a particular method that involves the secondary fermentation of the bottle at an angle so that all the yeast settles into the neck and you can pull it out through the cork. So you don't have to uncork it to get the yeast out, then recork it, right? So there's a special method that I think she pioneered. I'd have to double check, but she also was a bit of a blockade runner in terms of getting her champagne specifically to Russia in order to increase the distribution of her champagne. And it's actually thanks to Russia that the popularity of champagne, this association of champagne with celebration started to happen. It's a good book. It's called the Veuve Clicquot. The cover is that yellowy orange associated with the brand, and it's just fascinating how this one woman, at a time when women were not expected to do anything, took over a business and made it an empire, essentially.
It's fantastic. I think it's because of the trend. Because of Russian royalty. They wanted it, and they made it such a celebrated item that it became some sort of higher class. They associated kind of a higher class to it.
Yep.
The other royal families throughout Europe also wanted it.
Well, because they weren't going to be bested by the Russians. I mean,
no. And it became this kind of like regal thing. This kind of hard to attain item that only the highest members of the highest class could have this one beverage. And it's beautiful. And I think champagne only being allowed to be called champagne if it comes from the Champagne region, I think that kind of adds a little extra something to the rarity of it.
Well, that doesn't stop people though. I mean, I've seen champagne from California, and I'm like,
oh, absolutely. But someone from France is not going to see that champagne from California.
No. I think, the French are very proud of the products that are made there. And so this is it's a protection as opposed to a lot of things. And it is a technique that they pioneered. So, I think there's something to be said for that. Although I will say, I have had amazing sparkling wines from all over. So doesn't mean they're not good if they're not champagne.
Exactly. Something we discussed earlier before when we were not recording was Prosecco. Prosecco is an Italian sparkling wine, and it's delicious. It is so good.
Yeah. Same with cava. Cava is Spanish. It's the same kind of... Yeah.
It's good. Cava. I saw cava in my reading. It can be prepared so incredibly similarly to champagne. But the simple fact that it's not from champagne means it's not champagne. It's still very, 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 very good.
I will say
And
I like a prosecco for a cocktail.
Yeah.
I did not make a cocktail for this one. I can be a little bit of a purist when it comes to a good bottle of champagne.
Okay.
But there's some good champagne cocktails out there.
There
Not
are.
mimosas. Not a fan of a mimosa.
Really? I was going to say mimosa. I've enjoyed mimosas quite a bit. I've enjoyed them great.
Yeah,
I'm not big on early day drinking, but a mimosa has a very refreshing kind of breakfasty appeal to it. I like to know how anyone can drink a Bloody Mary.
Oh, me either.
A mimosa makes sense. Mimosa just makes sense.
I think it's the orange juice. So like I've had like a pineapple mimosa. I like that. Or Bellini, which is peach juice. I think it's the orange, if there's other options. Say.
Nice.
Yeah. But champagne is fascinating in and of itself. So, full disclosure, there is a champagne episode of the Luxi podcast. And I only lifted a little bit from that. I actually did some additional research.
I have listened to that episode.
But there is enough pressure, there's enough CO2 to produce around 49 million bubbles in a 750 milliliter bottle of champagne. And the pressure is around 60 to 90 PSI, which is the same as the tires on a double-decker bus.
Yes, I have it.
Have you ever had a bottle go on you, like pop before you're finished opening it? Have you ever had a...
Yes.
Yeah.
I've had that. Did you know that the exit velocity of champagne can exceed 30 miles an hour or 50 kilometers an hour?
I believe it.
Yeah. Because of this incredible pressure, you'll notice that the glass on a champagne bottle is sometimes up to twice as thick as the glass on any other wine bottle. It has to be able to hold that pressure and keep it.
Yes.
So that I think it seeps out.
Which is also why you have the cage on the cork, too.
Yes. And what's that cage called?
I don't know. What's it called?
Oh, I know it. I'm going to say it very wrong.
It's okay.
It's called an agrafe. A-G-R-A-F-F-E.
Agrafe.
That's agrafe.
French.
It's called an agrafe. That's the name of the wire cage and the little steel cap at the top that holds the cork in place until it's time to put it in your unwind. I love that.
I know. It's fun. It adds to the experience of the opening, right?
Mm-hmm. The whole process.
Have you ever sabered open a bottle of champagne?
Saber opened. I have seen it done in person. And it blew me away that it's absolutely possible. And I'm very proud to say I have never tried it.
I want to try it.
And badly. No. You mentioned that you're a little bit clumsy in the previous episode. I'm going to double down and say my clumsiness is many multiples worse. If I try to saber open a bottle of champagne, there's going to be problems for a lot of people.
I am clumsy, but I did used to be a fencer, so I want to think that I could manage this particular thing. Just this one.
Wow. A scientist and a fencer.
Look, I went to high school in Connecticut. These were the things that were options. Tennis, lacrosse, fencing. You had to do one of them. Kind of mandatory. There's levels that you have to keep up the appearances, right? But that originated with Napoleon and his troops, apparently.
Really?
Yeah, and so you run the blunt edge, not the sharp, but the blunt edge of the saber up across the bottle at an angle, and it clips the ring at the top of the bottle, and that's how it opens it. And because there's so much pressure in the bottle, it's actually, you don't need a whole lot of force to have that happen.
Oh,
yeah.
And what blows me away, and this is something I would have to read up about a lot, is that when you've ever seen someone saber open a bottle of champagne, that angled cross section they cut off is perfectly smooth.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, are there any little glass fragments that get into the champagne itself? But no,
because the velocity of the liquid, because when you saber open a bottle, it's not the slow opening of the cork, and so the velocity is increased, and it brings some of the liquid out with it. And so if there were pieces of glass, they're exited out.
It's flushed out with the champagne.
Flushed out with the champampagne. Yeah.
Okay.
Physics.
All drinks should be contained in pressure.
It's just more fun.
It's just more fun. It's just more fun. It makes a pop. It makes a little misty smoke come out of it. You can snap it open with a blade. Let's
talk about the mist, because this is fascinating.
Yes, and I
am not, like, if you ask me a question, I might not be. Physics was never my strong suit. This is like, I need to phone my husband for Lifeline here, but we're going to try. Okay. So when the cork is popped, there's a gaseous mixture, mostly CO2, but also water and ethanol vapors that expands out of the bottleneck and into the air, right? And it experiences what's called adiabatic cooling, which is a physics phenomenon that drops the temperature several tens of degrees and causes the immediate condensation of the water vapor in the air surrounding the bottle. And that is the mist that you see when you pop a bottle of champagne.
Awesome.
So adiabatic, and again, I could be mispronouncing this, cooling reduces heat by changing air pressure through volume expansion. So it's one of those physics things where something expands and something else happens. And the temperature of the bottle actually influences the color of the plume. So bottles stored around 20 degrees Celsius will be gray to white, and those stored at lower temperatures, the plume will be more blue colored. Physics. I know.
I love physics.
I do now. I did not in college. It was not my favorite science subject ever, and I had to take it, and I fought all the way through it. And now I wish I had paid more attention.
Oh, physics is fantastic.
It is. But again, I feel like if my physics class was explaining the pop of a champagne bottle, I might have been more interested. I mean, to be fair, my physics instructor did shoot himself across the room on a pair of roller skates with a fire hydrant, but... I
saw a physics fail in a parking lot outside of the Costco the other day. There were 3 people trying to push a TV into the back of a car. There's one person to the left of the TV with a feet firmly planted on the ground, pushing the TV into the car.
Yeah.
There's another person on the right side of the TV with a feet firmly planted on the ground, pushing it in. And there's a third person trying to help, and she was much shorter. So she stood on top of a flatbed rolling cart, and she's pushing the back of the TV. And she gave it 2 good shoves before she just started rolling away. It had no effect on the TV. And luckily I was there, and I ran and caught her and I pushed her back. Physics!
Physics.
Physics.
So there's so much physics when it comes to champagne. So
yes.
Even the act of pouring the champagne into the glass involves a lot of physics. So when the gaseous CO2 and the CO2 dissolved in the champagne are at equilibrium when the bottle is sealed. Once you pop that cork, that equilibrium is no longer there. And this leads to the liquid phase losing dissolved carbon dioxide as the system tries to balance itself out. The concentration of the dissolved CO2 is key to the production of the bubbles, right? And you need about 3 grams per liter of dissolved CO2 to trigger the bubble. Nucleation is what it's called, right? But there's a big loss of CO2 when you dissolve CO2 when you pour the champagne into the glass. And so what's the best way to pour champagne? Do you go straight down like a beer? Like in the last episode, you dumped your beer straight into that glass, right? Or
there's a reason. But
yeah, we had a Guinness, right?
Yeah.
So is it a straight dump or is it a down the side, right? Which one do you think would be better for champagne? Yeah.
Down the side?
Yeah, tilting the flute and pouring down the side was found to have significantly less impact on the concentration of the dissolved CO2 than pouring straight down the middle of the glass. So more bubbles.
More bubbles.
More bubbles. Yeah.
Nucleation of the bubbles.
Nucleation, that's what it's called. And there are many producers of champagne glasses put little etchings on the bottom of the glass to help the bubbles nucleate.
I think it's to provide more surface area.
Yeah.
They have these little areas that they can hold up and then start nucleating.
So what about you? Champagne facts.
I didn't know what more to say. You kind of grabbed the
headlines.
I was very excited about the cork and the pressure and the exit velocity and the
cool.
ridges inside. I had ridges in the bottom of a champagne glass. But I did not have the word nucleation, which I'm very jealous of. Well,
I found this amazing review article that went through the entire step from popping the glass to tasting the champagne and did all of these tests. Like I will hopefully remember to post some of the figures from this paper because they're beautiful. They do imaging of the sort of vortices that bring the bubbles up to the surface and surface them around in the champagne glass. It's a really cool paper. So it goes through the whole process. So now we're at the shape of the glass. So which shape is better? A flute, which is what you and I are currently drinking out of. There is a coupe glass, which is the wider champagne glass that is often associated with like the 1950s, but was actually designed back in the days of Marie Antoinette. So it turns out that champagne, there's a lot of gaseous CO2 and volatile or aromatic compounds that come up into the headspace of the glass via the bubbles, right? The bubbles burst and they contain these volatile or aromatic compounds. But part of it is actually the CO2 itself. So it turns out that humans can sense gaseous CO2, and it triggers the same pain receptors in our brains that are activated by spicy foods. So if you
like bubbly drinks or soda pop.
Yeah. So
really? Interesting.
If you measure the gaseous CO2 above the different glasses, there's twice the concentration above a flute as a coupe. And tasters say that the smell of champagne, especially that first sniff, is more irritating if the champagne is served in a flute than in a coupe. So like, stick your nose in there. It's a little tangy.
A little tangy.
Yeah.
So if I had a wider glass, I'd have a completely different champagne experience.
Yeah. And
I wouldn't think it's spicy.
Yeah. And so a lot of people actually prefer what's called a tulip glass now, and it looks a little bit more like a red wine glass. And that's because if you go too wide, like a coupe glass, then you lose some of the bubbles, which is what you want as well. And obviously the flute can be a little too narrow. So it's kind of middle ground where you allow for the bubble nucleation and for kind of balancing out that experience of smelling the champagne. It's apparently the best way to do it.
Tulip glass.
Tulip glass. Or just a wine glass, actually. A lot of places are starting to serve them just in wine glasses. Yeah. Because the length of the glass. Yeah. So the length of the glass gives you good bubble speed. Because if you look, right, the bubbles are quite fast. And they're, kind of forming these rivulets to the surface. Yeah, exactly.
Hard to see.
Yeah, it's a little hard.
Too many doodads.
Well, you need the microphone, right? So we talked a little bit about the secondary fermentation. So when the cork is popped, some CO2 is released into the air immediately, and a good portion of it remains in the liquid and forms the bubbles. And as we mentioned, the bubbles don't just bring dissolved CO2, they also bring these volatile organic compounds that are responsible for the aroma of the champagne. So when they burst, they release these organics and we inhale them. And this kind of enhances the overall tasting experience of a champagne. There was some research that looked at like 2D and 3D computational fluid dynamics of the flow of the bubbles.
My goodness.
I know. I'm telling you, there's some like serious research into this. And they found what's called a two-phase flow of the bubbles in a single glass of champagne. So the two flows were toroidal, which is like the fancy scientific way of saying donut shape, along the ascending column of the bubbles. And there were these surface eddies that then interact with that flow of the bubbles up and back around. Which I thought was just super interesting. Like it just looks like they're just going up and popping if you just look at the glass. But there is actually like a flow, sort of a current in your glass of champagne.
Yeah, I'm staring at the surface to see if I can see any eddy, and I'm wondering if maybe I do.
Yeah, maybe.
Because the bubbles kind of come up to the surface.
Yeah.
They don't just hit surface and pop. They're kind of just like
roll over,
hovering there for a moment before they move around.
Yeah.
This is a reminder to all of you to go to more fancy dress parties so you can have more champagne. You can just sit there and stare at it.
It's mesmerizing.
It's actually kind of worth it. It's kind of nice.
You don't have to go to fancy dress parties, though.
You don't. Absolutely not.
I think I said in our break that champagne and goldfish are a really good combination.
I've always associated the food I associate with champagne is cake and other desserts because I've had champagne in the beginnings, the middles, and the ends of various affairs, but I've never eaten anything with champagne. It's always been a dessert or a cake.
I will say, potato chips. Potato chips is so good, especially truffle flavored ones.
Okay.
Go do some research.
All right. I'm going to do some research. I don't know if you have Trader Joe's out there, but there's a Trader Joe's here, and they have truffle chips, and I'm going to get them tomorrow, and I'm going to have champagne with it. And
you can tell me. You can let me know. A dry one.
I absolutely plan to. I am going to do this.
Extra brut. So the appellations on the bottle, brut, extra brut, those are what are called the dosage. And those are the residual sugar amounts left in the champagne. So for people like me who like drier champagnes, we're going to go with a brut or extra brut and not a, what's it called? It's like a semi-dec, something like that. Those are sweeter. So there's a whole range of sweetness in champagnes that has to do with the residual sugar left in the champagne after the secondary fermentation.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is for anybody who's interested, there's a really wonderful company in Seattle. It's called Fat Cork, and they import and sell exclusively small vintner grower champagnes from France, right? So actual champagnes. And when I say vintner grower, what that means is that the people who make the wine are also the people who grow the grapes, which is not always the case. Many winemakers and champagne makers do not grow the grapes. They purchase the grapes from grape growers, right? So these are small, usually family-run operations that do both. What was amazing about this company is that if you buy champagne from them, it comes with a card that tells you all about the champagne, the region it's grown in, the family that makes it, and tasting notes and things like that. It's really very fun. So for a while when we were in Seattle, as a gift to me, Demos got me a membership in that. So we had, every twice a year, we had a couple bottles of champagne delivered to the house to try these different, and there are very different flavors associated with different champagnes, as people probably know, but because there are different grapes that go into champagne. As much as I don't like Chardonnay as a wine, it is one of the grapes that makes champagne.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. So shout out to Fat Cork. We don't get sponsored by them. They're just a really cool company.
We should tag them for more that I'm posting about that. Wow.
So, yeah. Do you want to learn a little bit more about bubbles?
Always. I want to learn about bubbles. But I want to throw in, do you know what riddling is?
I don't. Okay. You explain riddling. Do it.
I have to throw in something. Riddling is whenever you store your champagne, you store your champagne bottles in an angle with the neck pointing down. Riddling is the rotation that people do to make sure that nothing settles in one spot in the bottle for too long. You go through your collection, if you have a collection, or if you just have that one bottle you're saving. It's good to rotate it once every year or so. Turn the bottle around, let everything settle in a different place. There are also riddling machines for those who are very big in storing their champagnes. So it's like another wine rack. Put your champagne bottle in, it's pointing down, and it's on some sort of like a little conveyor belt. And over time, very slowly, it's consistently rotating your bottles so nothing settles for too long. That's what I learned about riddling.
That's cool. I love it. And that's the, I think, traditional method of making champagne. So I think some sparkling wines are add the CO2. So they don't necessarily do the secondary, they do a bit of secondary fermentation and then add some bubble to it as well. But bubbles. So full disclosure, this is a repeat of some information I had from the Luxai episode, but since we're not a completely overlapping Venn diagram here, I figured it'd be good to repeat some of it. So there was a study to look at characterizing the bubbles in champagne. And the hypothesis was that they would be akin to the bubbles in sea spray, like sea foam that you see in waves.
Okay.
And sea spray is used to transport, or I don't know if use is the right word, but does transport gases, volatile organics, salts, and surfactants, and biological materials up from the ocean and into the atmosphere. Okay. And the spray is made of two types of droplets. There's film droplets that are small and form as the film of the emerging bubble disintegrates. And there's jet droplets that are larger and are formed as the cavity of the bubble collapses and ruptures. So there's like two ways bubbles can pop. So the scientists, they set up a series of experiments. They used a syringe pump and 5 different types of liquids, and they had an array of measurement methods, including close-up photography, ultra-fast imaging, high-speed digital cameras, fluid dynamic modeling, etc. So in their experiments, 300 to 500 bubbles burst per second burst at the top of a champagne glass, which is a lot.
300 to 500 bubbles burst per second. Okay.
And what they found is champagne is composed only of those larger jet droplets, as opposed to sea spray, which is mostly the film droplets. So it disproved their hypothesis, but that's okay, because that's part of research, right? And these jet droplets mean that the aerosols at the top of the champagne glass evaporate 10 times faster than from the surface of still liquids. So this is why you get this smell, right? Like a glass of cranberry juice, like it smells, but it doesn't have that same sort of impact. Even wine, like wine smells, but the champagne kind of like hits you because you're getting kind of sprayed.
Pushing the air up at you.
Yeah.
Okay. At 10 times that, at 10 times speed.
Yeah. So the fizz. Yeah, the fizz, it means that there's more exchanges of gases and volatile organics, and that means there's more chances for your nose to pick up on the aromas in the scents that allow you to taste the champagne too, because human taste is very connected to human smell, right?
Yes.
Like people said when they had COVID and they couldn't smell, they just couldn't taste anything either. And it's not necessarily that your taste buds weren't working. It's just this connection between the two senses. And an interesting fact from this research, so larger bubbles created more aroma diffusion. And so you would think that that would be better for the champagne tasting experience, but smaller bubbles are more prized in champagne making. So it's a bit of a contradiction there.
It's always the small little things
Yes.
in mass make the biggest differences.
Yeah, because you can see like you probably can't see, but the bubbles in mine are very, very, very tiny, right? And that's considered to be good apparently in champagne. You don't want like big soda bubbles. It's very uncouth.
Fascinating. It's always the small little thing.
Right. Bubbles. Bubbles are cool.
Bubbles.
They're just cool in general. Like when you think about it, like who doesn't like bubbles? Like as, a woman in my 40s, my son comes home with bubbles and I'm like, awesome, bubbles.
Books are fantastic. I dropped my daughter off at college about a month ago, and we made sure she had all the cool things she needed, and all the supplies, and all the food, and all the shoes, and all the socks, and everything. I also made sure she had something to make bubbles.
Yeah, they're fun. I used to make sure there was a little thing of bubbles in my glove compartment in my car in case I got stuck in traffic. What else are you gonna do?
I love that.
And then it spilled. And I was like, oh, okay.
Okay. It's just pretty much soap water, so it's not like you made a big mess.
No. But I mean, registration, insurance card, and all that stuff got pretty icky for a little while. That's all right. But it was fun while it lasted. Like I lived in the DC area. Traffic was just a way of life. It was going to happen.
I've only visited there a few times. That's a long while.
Yeah, it's intense. All right. Okay. Any other champagne facts that we missed?
Not really. I think you got quite a bit of it.
Yeah, we got glasses and bubbles and
got the glass, got the bubbles, we got the
airspeed velocity of
velocity. Yeah, I think we're good. Champagne's delicious.
It is. Next time we're on a quest, we will know the airspeed velocity of a cork, just in case. You never know. Mm-hmm. It's not a swallow, but you're getting the reference.
Airspeed velocity of a swallow.
Of a laden swallow.
Is it a European African?
Oh, see, you got it. Good.
Tomorrow, I'm going to go get some truffle chips.
Yes.
And I'm going to test this beautifully delicious theory. It just sounds right. I think, because it's two kind of fancy things. I don't know if how two wrongs don't make a right. Like, do two fancy things make a not fancy? I don't know. But I feel like they go together kind of automatically. Well, maybe too fancy just makes it double fancy.
It
just sounds good.
I think so. Good. Yeah, it is good. I'm telling you. All right. So that has been champagne. Effervescent, like our conversation. And yes. As always, drink responsibly. Yes. Make sure your liver gets a break. And we will see you next time.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Cheers.